right, Edgar, Jarry, thanks for joining us here today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having us.
For the benefit of the audience, would you mind doing a brief introduction of each of you, and then we'll get into some of the topics.
Yeah, definitely. Jarry, you want to kick off?
Yeah, I can kick it off. Hey, everyone. My name is Jarry. I'm the co-founder of Ellipsis Labs. We're a company that built Phoenix, which is a spot limit order book on Solana. Phoenix has been live for about 6 months at this point, and we recently launched our front-end application for it.
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, guys. My name is Edgar. I'm the founder of MarginFi. We're a lending protocol on Solana, leading in activity, volume, TVL. Pretty exciting to see high-performing DeFi making a really strong comeback. My background is across finance and tech. I've spent my life building efficient systems, and I'm a bit of a nerd for performance. So definitely excited to be here and talk about DeFi 2.0.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So there's been a meme in the Solana community that's taken off this year, OPOS, or only possible on Solana. Can you explain, like, what does that mean for you? And in your own words, like, what does that mean for your protocols?
Yeah, I'm happy to start here. I think that the phrase only possible on Solana, it is a bit of a meme, but there's a lot of truth to it in that high throughput and low fees enabled you to do a lot of things that would be strictly impossible to do on other chains. I get asked a lot by people like why we didn't build Phoenix on a Ethereum L2, and the answer to that's like really simple. It's like too expensive too. If you're providing quotes on a limit order book, in the real world, like say outside of crypto, you're probably placing and canceling thousands of orders an hour. Each order there is like basically free, right? The marginal cost of placing an order on a centralized exchange is zero. But when you're interacting with the blockchain, you have to pay gas in some way, and that cost will add up. On Solana, a single transaction costs 0.01 cent. On a chain like Optimism or Arbitrum, that could be like 1 to 2 cents. And the order of magnitude here is like really massive. If you're placing 1 order per second on chain for a market on Solana, that costs you about like 36 cents an hour. Whereas if you're doing this on Ethereum L2, that's like $36. And if this thing is at the scale that you're trying to run like an operation, if you're trying to run markets on the level of what you might find on the NASDAQ, and you want this to be all decentralized, this cost is just purely prohibitive. And because market makers need to be profitable, like for markets to exist, both sides have to have a reason to be there. Liquidity providers aren't going to just sit on the books and bleed out money over time. They want to be able to sustainably provide liquidity to people who need it. It requires the cost to be sufficiently low and the throughput to be sufficiently fast. So that really is what Solana enables. Like the fee is sufficiently low to support a sustainable operation, and the throughput is high enough for the market makers to place thousands of orders per hour.
Yeah, definitely. When I think about OPOS, I think about the Henry Ford quote, right? If I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Yeah. And I think about, now I've been on a horse twice in my life, right? And it jumped once accidentally. I cried. I was in like 4th grade. I got over it. But fundamentally, when you think about the difference of what horses can do and cars can do, right? That comparison today seems a little bit ridiculous, right? I don't get into that conversation anymore. Oh, like, have you thought about riding a horse, right? On a road trip. Solana is very similar to that, right? When I talk to folks about the way that we implement solutions at MarginFi, and they make comparisons to traditional, more incumbent Web3 infrastructure, and the way that those projects have implemented solutions towards similar problems, I have to stop them and say, listen, like this comparison doesn't really make sense. We have to go all the way back, look at this problem from first principles, and the approach to solving finance problems on chain can look very, very different than it does in other ecosystems. And that's simply because Solana allows, and Solana now joined by a pretty exciting emerging ecosystem of high-performing chains, it allows you to do things that are just absolutely impossible and irrelevant to talk about on slower chains.
Yeah, so everyone just saw Kyle present about integrated systems versus modular systems. And one of the main points that he was making was around the parallel fee markets that exist in a system like Solana. Can you talk about what that enables your protocol to do that it couldn't do on a single-threaded system like some of these EVM L2s?
Yeah, for like a marketplace or an exchange, generally speaking, what you can effectively do is sort of like isolate each market into its little pod. So if I have markets for ETH, for BTC, for Sol, for really any asset pair that you can think of, each pair is isolated to that like part of the system. So if you want to do transactions across multiple markets at the same time, they are not limiting each other because there's no piece of state across those different markets that are overlapping. On Ethereum, all of these would eat up the same block space. On Solana, they eat up the same block space too, but they don't eat up the same execution pipeline. And so being able to parallelize transactions across different markets is a pretty powerful thing that really is only enabled by some type of parallel execution. I think a lot of chains are kind of realizing that this is important now and moving towards like figuring out ways to shard the execution layer. But I think Solana was first in realizing that this was an important bottleneck to try to mitigate.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly important separation of concerns, right? At the end of the day, you want fee markets to be as granular as possible, right? Because you only want a given group of people that are considering paying for something, that are considering paying fees, to worry about what they care about, right? Us in this room, we're here having this conversation. We don't want to be worrying about the conversations happening in other buildings across Austin. It doesn't make sense, right? If we did, it'd create a lot more congestion, and we would probably be pretty frustrated, waiting for things outside of our scope to pass by or paying costs that we don't feel are fair to us. And I mean, this is, again, this is one of those, there's a spectrum of fee markets, right? From fully global to theoretically, perfectly scoped down to the given set of concerns at any given point, right? And incumbent blockchain infrastructures have pretty much been all the way on the end of this global spectrum, right? Solana is definitely making a push towards the other side of the spectrum, and I think the benefits are pretty stellar.
Yeah, I mean, specifically for MarginFi, one of the things I think about here is when there's liquidations, right? And having the ability to do those liquidations in parallel to other transactions. So if I'm sending a transaction to pay someone for XYZ reason, your liquidation should not be competing with my payment, and I should not be driving up your fee, or you shouldn't be driving up my fee.
Yep.
Specifically, right? So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can frame this in the context of liquidations start happening, market volatility starts happening. Liquidations need to happen, right? MarginFi has high-performant liquidators that are liquidating on the protocol, right? They may be professional firms that have built out sophisticated systems to help keep MarginFi solvent, right? Solvency, I mean, of utmost importance for any lending product, right? In the same universe, you have your average users, right? That are point-and-click users. They're using MarginFi, and they're trusting MarginFi to maintain their solvency and to be able to move their funds if market volatility comes around, or if their use case requires some kind of money movement, right? Allowing professional liquidators to have a separate set of concerns from these point-and-click users allows everybody to operate within a universe that they're comfortable with, right? And that's super, super important in times of market volatility, because those are concerning times, right? If those point-and-click users were feeling bottlenecked, and worse, if they didn't quite understand why, it's a really scary time.
yeah, and maybe Jarry, you can talk a little bit about along these same lines, like, why do you think order books are a better solution for traders, especially during these volatile times, than what we see on other chains, namely automated market maker systems?
Yeah, Tushar, that's an excellent question. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about like what liquidity is and like where it should come from. And fundamentally, I think I mentioned this earlier, but like markets can only really exist like sustainably when both sides of the equation are able to get what they want from it. Makers, being the liquidity providers, they need to be able to be sustainably profitable during times, whether there's high volatility or low volatility. Takers just want to be able to get liquidity when they need it. And I think volatile times are especially important for this, where takers are probably more frantic for liquidity, but they should also be willing to pay more for it. Because during the times where there's high volatility, there's a lot more uncertainty in the market, and if you're someone who's like really, really anxious to exit a position, you should be pretty happy to pay a little bit more just for that certainty to get that risk off your shoulders. One thing that like AMMs do not give you the opportunity to do is the ability to set your fee rate, right? The ability to set how much you charge per trade, whereas on an order book, you're able to do this. And so in real markets, I used to trade commodity options, and there were periods of time where the market just disappeared. Like, meaning there are literally no quotes on the screen that you can like buy or sell from directly as a taker. And this is because there was just so much uncertainty in the market. Like no one knew what the prices actually were. On Ethereum, if something like this happened, the prices would be the same. Like nothing would really change, and the fee rate would be constant. This fundamentally doesn't make too much sense from the perspective of the maker, because the maker is someone who's trying to, like, they're not trying to make trades that they don't think are profitable in any way whatsoever. In these periods of time, when it's really volatile, they should just be going wider. And order book enables you to do this. If you think that the market regime is particularly volatile, what you should do is you should make your quotes a lot wider than they would be in cases when it's not volatile. On an AMM, your quotes are always the same width all the time. They're always tight. And while this might be good for the takers, where it's super volatile and you want to exit a position, maybe the AMM gives you a better price. Maybe you're able to cross the spread and exit your risk position at a very like small fraction of the fee cost. Ultimately, the person on the other side of that won't be very happy because they did not get filled on the trade with the amount of edge they would need to in the case that, because it's so volatile and because you should be charging more premium given the fact that the markets are moving so quickly at the time.
Yeah, that ability to have variability in the spread.
Exactly.
Just critically important for a sustainable ecosystem where both makers and takers are happy, as opposed to the status quo where really takers are happy, especially the MEV bots.
Yeah.
Super happy that AMMs exist. But you know, LPs or liquidity providers in these pools may not be as thrilled. But despite this, TVL on EVM chains is dominant, right? And TVL is a metric that a lot of people look at. Can Solana really compete on DeFi, given the lower TVL? And what does that path look like?
Edgar, want to start?
I got it, yeah. TVL is a metric we're all pretty familiar with. And it does a good job communicating some things about the success and activity of a given protocol. I think particularly when you look at, you take the OPOS view, right? You look at Solana with respect to what's possible in finance, right? Outside of just what has been possible on blockchain. What becomes pretty evident is that TVL as a metric has some serious shortcomings, right? TVL on Solana today may be lower than it is in EVM, right? We can put aside the fact that the value in crypto as a whole is still a tiny speck in the broad finance market, right? To say that we're early from a value perspective, I think is an incredibly obvious statement. What I find interesting is to look at metrics that highlight better what kind of finance activity happens on Solana given what's possible, right? Take MarginFi, for example. For a lending protocol, right, that in crypto has historically been a vehicle for more passive activity, MarginFi sees over $100 million move in and out of the protocol every single day, right? When we first came across this metric, which the working approach is calling this volume, right? But thinking about how many funds are moving in and out, I mean, we were shocked. It actually wasn't a metric initially that we were tracking, right? When we dove further into it, what we saw were use cases that professional firms were taking advantage of, given the speed and cost of Solana, right? And these are use cases that are pushing up their yield, they're mitigating their risk, right? They're bringing better capital efficiency to their portfolios, right? All of a sudden, TVL seems incredibly constrained as a metric, right? And so, while I'm not discarding TVL entirely, right? There is value in it. I think part of the OPOS evolution has been looking at finding a better way to measure success, right? Measure how well the protocols on a chain like Solana are solving finance problems.
Yeah, kind of echoing that point. I think that like TVL, one thing that it is really good for is this social proof, because it is a metric that made a lot of sense for these V1 AMMs that spun up on Ethereum. The ones that were just purely constant product. Because for those, the liquidity inside the protocol, like the amount of TVL that was locked inside a UniV2 pool, is directly proportional to like the prices that you're getting. In a lot of ways, this is because like UniV2 is such a capitally inefficient protocol. But back in the day when the only things on Ethereum were like were like Uniswap and Aave, this metric was kind of a really great, like a very simple way to measure like on-chain financial activity boiled down to a single number. I think as like liquidity primitives became a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more complex, TVL starts to make a lot less sense, but it still kept some of this social proof. It still kept some of this like influence as a number, where if you go to DeFi Llama and you sort by TVL, it gives you kind of a sense of like which chains hold all the capital. And I think that it's easy to sort of misconstrue this as this being like efficient DeFi, because I think TVL does not measure efficiency of DeFi at all. In fact, in many ways, it measures like the opposite. The more TVL that a chain might have, it could just mean that the capital is like less efficiently used. Phoenix as a protocol, and Orderbooks in particular, really don't care about TVL. TVL is like totally irrelevant, or at least like TVL in a vacuum is pretty irrelevant to the functioning of an order book, because a lot of the times the volume that's done on an order book really comes from the small amounts of capital that are stored near the top of the book, closer to the mid price. And if you treat it in this way where the TVL on an order book is not like an important metric, you can come up with other ones that maybe make a little bit more sense but still aren't perfect. One that we think a lot about is volume over TVL. So if the spot volume on the order book every day is, say, $3 million, but the book itself only has $100,000, that's a volume to TVL ratio of 30. Phoenix is one protocol that can actually accomplish this, where the volume to TVL ratio is extremely high. Whereas if you look at other protocols out there, if you look at almost any AMM, it's basically impossible to achieve this kind of ratio, because the amount of capital that you must lock inside this protocol is so enormously high. So when you look at this calculation, maybe you can get something like 2 to 3 if you're particularly capital efficient as an AMM. This would be like a UniV3 style pool. But ultimately, if you can achieve the same amount of efficiency for a lower amount of capital, this really opens up the world for you in terms of what you can do with your money. In fact, like most institutional capital providers don't want to be chucking in a huge amount of capital for like very little reward. It's just not a very effective use of their money. Like leverage in the real financial system is super, super valuable, because it gives you this ability to like use your money in multiple different ways. And I think that when you design liquidity primitives that understand this, you get a lot closer to emulating what like a real financial system might look on chain.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting way to frame TVL as an inefficiency metric, right? For MarginFi, when we look at TVL, they're suppliers, they're supplying capital. There's borrowers, they're borrowing that capital out, right? The difference there, the capital that's left in there, is TVL, right? Mm-hmm. So a great way to raise TVL for us is not to have any borrowers, no business, no activity, and for everybody to have a really inefficient experience, right? When you look at it that way, you go, it doesn't make any sense.
I think the metric to look at is activity. Like the KPI to care about is the activity that's relevant. It's the amount of dollars flowing in and out of a borrow-lend protocol. It's the amount of revenue for a trading protocol. It's the amount of volume and specifically fees paid. Because what I like to look for in these KPIs is something that can't be faked for free. It needs to be expensive. We wrote about this in our liquidity mining post a few years ago about just like, how should you reward people? And the conclusion that we came to is you should reward people for doing things that are costly rather than rewarding people for doing things that are free.
Yep.
So we have a lot of excitement right now in the Solana ecosystem for FireDancer. We've seen some interesting demos. We've seen Kevin Bowers from Jump demo some of the things that he's been working on and show off some of the performance. What implications does that increase in performance have for people who are actually building on top of the protocol, like MarginFi and Phoenix?
Yeah, I mean, I think that higher performance, just bluntly put, is better. Like, if I can do more things in a single block than I can today because of FireDancer, I think it's like a huge improvement over the current infrastructure, because that gets us closer to the NASDAQ. Like right now, if you look at Solana's performance, it's very good when you compare it to blockchains. It's like miles ahead of other blockchains, but it's still not to the point where you can really compete with a lot of centralized venues. And that's okay in many ways. Like centralized venues have like single points of failure, whereas decentralized blockchains, one of the things that make them interesting is the fact that they're robust and that they're so transparent because of this robustness, where you have this state that's shared across like multiple different parties. That's powerful. But you trade off efficiency in many ways. And that's kind of this thing that we've grown to accept. FireDancer kind of brings us closer to this vision of the world where that discrepancy kind of gets closed a little bit, that gap gets closed. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things there. And I think that like the team at Jump who's building this is like extremely impressive when you look at their pedigree. High frequency trading as an industry itself is like really, really competitive, where people start trying to optimize their systems down to the nanosecond in order to even compete with other people in the space. Information wants to move at the speed of light. That's like fundamentally something that is really, really important to understand when you're dealing with these like high throughput systems, and especially systems that deal with like finances and money, is that like information is this thing that can't really be stopped. This is like a thing where like if something it wants to get out of the world, you want to get it out of the world as quickly as possible. So if you can increase throughput and minimize latency, that helps increase overall efficiency.
Kevin Bowers, the man at war with the speed of light. Yeah, Jerry, I mean, you took the words out of my mouth. Blockchains store state, they store information, right? They keep a record of our world as it moves forward. And everything in our universe moves forward in real time, all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So fundamentally, the question that you have to ask is, okay, like, how fast can my notebook, where I'm keeping tabs on everything, move relative to real time? And FireDancer is a huge leap in that, in a context of a blockchain that is already leading on that front, right? I mean, tangibly at MarginFi, we think about risk management, right? Markets move. Our risk management needs to move with markets. We need to maintain solvency on the lending protocol. Can we take bad debt off of the protocol fast enough, right? And a major input to that question is, what is the infrastructure do we have to work with, right? So being on a faster chain and getting closer to the speed of real time allows us to create a much safer and better experience for our users.
Yeah. I still remember the presentation that Kevin gave at Breakpoint last year. It was like, the speed of light is not fast enough. That's quite a statement. But yeah, if you look at how prices work, really it's a continuous line. It's not this discrete block by block function. And when you quantize it into these blocks, that creates this inefficiency, right? Where now, because of that inefficiency or uncertainty that gets implemented, everyone has to quote wider. Or, and that affects order books, obviously. That'll affect liquidations for a borrow-lend protocol. And it just makes the whole thing less efficient. Yep. And I think, kind of the theme of what we're talking about is efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. How do we use block space most efficiently? How do we use bandwidth most efficiently? How do we use liquidity most efficiently? Rather than have slow block times, leave the liquidity locked up in some contract, and every 15 seconds there will be some trades. It's all good.
Yeah.
So this leads me to another narrative that has been really interesting recently, which is Solana DeFi 2.0. Right? Obviously, Solana had DeFi 1.0 kind of back in 2020, 2021. What do you think are kind of the big lessons learned from those earlier protocols? And what makes Solana DeFi 2.0 really different from what's happened in the past?
Yeah, I think when you look at Solana DeFi 1.0, there are a lot of things. So one, the chain was very young at the time, where no one really knew how this Solana chain worked. No one really knew how to develop on it, and all people really knew is they had to get to market as soon as possible. And I think that when you do this, you compromise on some designs. You try to cut corners a little bit, and you ultimately don't build for the long term. And I think this led to a lot of negative reputation for the chain across other people in the ecosystem. I think some of it is warranted, some of it is a little bit misunderstood. With this DeFi 2.0, I think that a lot of people sort of learned the lessons of DeFi 1.0. In the bull market, when everyone is trying to deploy as quickly as possible, everyone is trying to boost numbers in whatever way they can. I think that this has largely changed, where people are really looking at the tech for the merits of the tech, trying to build products that really demonstrate the capabilities of the chain itself, and trying to sort of show via good protocol design rather than just sort of launching these very short-term Ponzi's that this is a thing that can last a long time. DeFi is this thing that isn't more than just a toy experiment that you can throw around fake internet money with. It's a system that you could potentially use to reshape how we think about the financial system.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I come back to the horse and car analogy, right? DeFi 1.0 to me was building a lot of the same stuff that we'd seen elsewhere on Solana. Great. It's faster. We can kind of do an apples-to-apples comparison and talk about the performance. Now, the horses turned into cars. We're realizing that we can build roads completely differently, right? The fundamental architecture, the mechanism design underneath these products is going through a renaissance. That's the crux of DeFi 2.0 to me. It's a happy coincidence, or maybe it makes a lot of sense that the DeFi 2.0 trend came around right as the OPOS trend was really getting popular, right? Because I think a lot of DeFi builders are seeing a completely different way to build better solutions, given what this infrastructure has empowered, and they've had time to watch the 1.0 generation try their things out, iterate, and they can build on top of that.
Yeah. When there's new technology and something new becomes possible, often, what I notice is you have what I call skewmorphism. You kind of try to copy the old paradigm onto the new technology. Maybe I'll date myself here, but the example that always comes to my mind is in the 90s, there was yellowpages.com, right? And some people may not remember this, but there used to be this thing called a phone book, and you would get it delivered to your door, and you would have to look up phone numbers in that phone book. And then the internet came around, and people were like, man, this is going to be great. We're going to put the phone book on the internet. That's what the future is going to look like. But obviously, the future was Google and search, and now it's AI, right? You always see this with new technologies. People try and copy what was there before onto the new technology, but then what really ends up winning is the true reimagining of that product based on what the technology actually enables.
Yeah.
So I think there's always kind of this period where people are looking backwards instead of looking forward at what is new and newly possible.
It takes time to get a feel for a new building environment, right? This is why the Hello World software program is popular across developers everywhere, right? You're learning a new language, you want to get a feel for it, build the simplest thing you can imagine, right? Have the computer say hello back to you. I guess now with the LLM evolution, it might be even easier than before to get more interesting conversations out of a machine. But once you get that feel, right, you have a lot more painting space.
Yeah, I think the bull market also contributed to this sort of rampant copy-paste between Ethereum to Solana. When everything is just moving so quickly, I think the easiest thing that people can do is sort of like try to do it work elsewhere. Even though something like XY equals K really doesn't make any sense on Solana at all. Like that's a protocol, like the CP/AMM protocol was designed with the 12 TPS constraint in mind. And when you open it up to like 1,000 or 1,000 plus, then it really just doesn't become that practical of a way to design like a market protocol. But that being said, it's really simple and easy to implement. So when everyone is trying to launch the protocol as soon as possible and everyone trying to get as much TVL into the protocol as fast as possible, the natural thing to do is to try to just copy it and launch it faster than your competitors. I think that we saw a lot of this in like 2021, 2022, when the market was in like the peak bull phase. The one thing that is nice about being in a bear market is that it lets you design these protocols that are a lot more thoughtful. Like you can put a lot more time into building things that truly are like, according to the meme, like only possible on Solana, because there's not this like, obviously I think there's still a lot of pressure to ship as quickly, but there is less like urgency from the perspective like you need to get this product out to market and you need to do so with cutting corners. I think that like the corner cutting has been reduced quite a lot, which I think is a good thing about being able to build in this period of time.
Yeah, so I have a question for you that's probably on the minds of a lot of people in the audience who don't spend full time on the industry, right? A lot of allocators are thinking about crypto, some percentage of their time, but not full time. In your current experience, recent experience, what is the vibe like amongst the developers? And what do conviction levels look like? What has the bear market kind of done for morale and the ecosystem generally?
Well, morale is definitely lower. There's no doubt about that. Like people are a lot less excited to be in crypto. Like when the prices are down, people are a lot less excited to be in crypto when it seems like everyone is pivoting towards AI instead. This is kind of like without a shadow of a doubt. What I do kind of find though is that the developers who stuck around have a lot more conviction. There are people who are like, I guess, more passionate about like what the industry could potentially offer down the line. They're not really thinking about how can I make more money in the next 3 months. They're thinking about like, how can I build something that can last 10 years? So I think that's like quite interesting, and like that's something that is, I think, very positive from this bear market experience, where now a lot of people are gone. The things that are annoying though, or things that like are a little bit disappointing, is that a lot of the good talent is left too. Where I think one great thing about a bull market is that you can drive a lot of talented developers into the space and get them interested in crypto. I think when a lot of the activity dies down, a lot of these people are also less willing to stay on. And so that part is a little sad. Hopefully we can do a part to sort of improve this. But yeah, I'd say overall morale is down, but the quality of people that you end up talking to has gone up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll offer a slightly complimentary view. I think the quality of people overall has gone up. And that's because a lot of the lower quality, shorter term people have left the ecosystem, which for me has been great. I remember when market was kind of moving, the cycle was moving towards the bear market. I have friends across different industries, a lot in tech, a lot in finance, and we'd catch up over drinks. They'd say, Edgar, how are things going? And I'd be breathless, right? I'd say it's nonstop. Right? Development velocity is through the roof. We're trying to keep up with it. We have these interesting user demographics across the world. We've particularly been thinking a lot about Asia recently, so dissecting that region. And they would look at me with this blank face and say, wait, like the news headlines say crypto is dead. And I was like, well, where is that happening, right? Like, why didn't my vacation come into my inbox? And I think it is relevant both to recognize that from a broad retail market perspective, this industry does go through cycles. We are in a bear market, right? But the density of high quality projects, those that are resilient and that I think are building real solutions, right, that are interested in longevity, that has maintained velocity, that has captured market share. I think that creates a super strong foundation for the next bull run. And so I couldn't be feeling more privileged to be here.
Yeah, people sometimes look at the volatility and the boom and bust cycles in the industry as a negative. And I actually think it's quite positive, because what you see is you see a huge influx, and then you trim the fat, right? And you see who has staying power and who doesn't. Then you see another huge influx, and you trim the fat. And that gives you the opportunity to build a really solid foundation, as opposed to kind of on a shaky foundation. When you're building fast, it's going to be shaky. Whether it's you're building physical infrastructure, you're building software, you're building anything. If you're building really fast, it's going to be shaky. So I actually think the boom and bust cycle and the extreme cyclicality is a positive rather than a negative, specifically for just like how the culture and the quality of the products in the space develop. So I have one last question for you guys. One recent development that we've gotten a lot of questions about and we've seen a lot of conversation about is people starting to fork the SVM. We saw Rune, the founder of Maker, go and say they're looking at forking the SVM for MakerDAO to have a more performant chain. We saw Ellipsis launch, or Eclipse, sorry, Eclipse launch a ETH L2 using the SVM. What do you think this means for the SVM? What do you think this means for Solana? And what do you think it means for your protocols in particular?
Yeah, so I think that this trend of sort of adopting the SVM is very good for this SVM, obviously, right? I think it can take a lot of developers who maybe previously were not interested in building on Solana or like learning this new system to maybe at least start looking into it and seeing like what can be done there. So I think that's like purely positive. In terms of what it means for Solana, that's a little bit less clear for me, whether or not liquidity will actually like migrate away from Solana into these SVM chains. That would be something that like I think it fragments liquidity a little bit. It really depends on what gets built on these chains ultimately. I think it comes down to product, like at the end of the day. Like if these SVM chains have the same properties of Solana and they're able to execute on a lot of the BD necessary to move capital over, move protocol over, then I think that like you can get this sort of proliferation of this second virtual machine where you have a lot of activity occurring on these secondary chains. But there are still a lot of properties that are like pretty important to satisfy. I think the low latency and throughput are the primary ones, where, yeah, the SVM itself does enable some unique things with respect to like throughput and latency, but you can't solve all of that with just the virtual machine alone. There are other components that matter there as well. And for a protocol like Phoenix, I actually think that's the most important part. It's not the virtual machine that's like important for Phoenix to operate properly. It's the fact that you have the fees and the throughput to support it. And so I think it's good in that you're driving more resources into people who will be able to develop on SVM-related chains. That could potentially drive more developer talent kind of across the ecosystem, which I think is broadly a really, really great thing. In terms of this being like a future for applications to live, that is still really to be determined. And the determining factors are like whether capital can migrate from existing chains to these new chains, and whether or not those chains have the same execution capabilities necessary to support these applications.
Yeah, I think about this two ways. On one hand, I think it lends credibility to the SVM, right? More people are using it. Doesn't really matter why they're using it. The fact is people have decided they want to use it. That's good, right? The second side of this is the integration versus modularization conversation, right? And I think we've seen this across all of tech, right? Far outside of crypto. Integrate where you can, modularize where you have to, right? And so I think this is likely, this fan out of different SVMs is likely a short-term exploration of the SVM itself. It's likely that integrated state will come back to Solana or will maintain on Solana, and that composability factor that Solana offers will prevail. But in the meantime, it's great to see more credibility to this technology.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I would say, like, I break it down into 3 segments. Like, what does this trend of forking the SVM mean for the SVM as an ecosystem? What does it mean for Solana as a chain? And then what does it mean for protocols that build on top of Solana? And so, I think it's unequivocally good for the SVM. It's taking, a clear leadership position as one of the main virtual machines in the whole ecosystem, and doing that, through a pretty brutal bear market with some idiosyncratically bad things that have happened, right? So like that's, I think, not debatable. As to whether it's good for Solana or not, that's a bit more of a debate, right? But I think it comes down to what both of you said around performance. At the end of the day, it's the VM does not equal performance. It helps performance, but it's not equal to performance. And so whoever has the best performance probably will have a magnet to attract capital and developers. And then for the applications that build on top of the SVM, this once again seems unequivocally good, because now you can deploy to more places, you can have more distribution, you can have more users, more success. So at least for me, I'm very enthused by this trend. And the example that I would draw to people who are thinking about this question is just the EVM has proliferated quite a bit, and that has been quite positive for Ethereum, not negative. So what's actually different here? All right, so I think we're up on time. Thank you both for joining us here today. If people in the audience have any questions, we will be outside for the next break that's coming up right now. So thank you, everyone.